When your company earns unlimited 2% cash back on all purchases with Capital One, that's serious business. So Stephen at SandCloud got a serious business card, the Spark Cash Plus card from Capital One.
We used our 2% cash back to help build our retail presence.
Savvy, Stephen.
And we get big purchasing power, so our business can spend more and earn more.
The Spark Cash Plus card from Capital One. What's in your wallet?
Terms and conditions apply. Find out more at CapitalOne.com/SparkCashPlus.
Some stories never make the headlines, some victims remain nameless, and some mysteries fade before they're ever solved. If you're drawn to the strange and unexplained, from cryptids and aliens to hauntings, true crime, and everything in between, you need to check out Unknown, Unsolved, Unseen. Hosted by Frank and Sage, this podcast dives into a plethora of unexplained phenomena. They research, discuss, and share their own opinions on stories that linger in the shadows, from the unsolved to the unbelievable. Listen to Unknown, Unsolved, Unseen wherever you get your podcasts, because every story, no matter how strange, deserves to be told.
We live in a world saturated with signals. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, radio wave, EMF. Invisible frequencies pulse through our homes, our phones, even our bodies. But what if some of those signals aren't just technological? What if they're haunted? What if the screens we stare into are not just windows into the world, but doors to something else entirely?
Welcome to Down the Crooked Path. I'm your host, Amanda Joy. Join me as we dive into eerie and spine-chilling stories that blur the lines between reality and the unknown. From cryptids and mysterious disappearances to true crime, UFO sightings, and paranormal activity, venture into the unknown and uncover the secrets that lie down the crooked path.
From Thomas Edison's unrealized spirit phone to ghostly TikTok glitches and unexplained EVPs captured on smartphones, the intersection of the paranormal and the digital is growing stranger by the day. As our tech evolves, so does the question, are we accidentally turning into something beyond the veil? Could the dead be reaching out, not through candlelit seances, but through corrupt files, static bursts, and flickering screens? Humanity has always been curious about what lies on the other side, whether it's the afterlife, alternate dimensions, or echoes of consciousness. We've searched for ways to connect. But now instead of mediums and Ouija boards, we have apps, algorithms, and audio spectrums. So tonight we're asking, in a world built on signal and code, are ghosts also going digital? In October of 1920, Thomas Edison, one of the most celebrated inventors in history, made a startling announcement. In an interview with Scientifica American, he revealed that he had been working on a device to communicate with the dead. He called it simply a spirit communication apparatus. Really, it was a phone. Unlike the theatrical seances and table rapping popular in the spiritualist circles of the time, Edison's approach was grounded in science. If spirits were real, he reasoned, and if they retained intelligence after death, then surely they would be made particles or energy that could be measured, manipulated, and, most importantly, heard. The media response was immediate and intense. Headlines speculated wildly, and the public was divided. Some saw Edison's claim as visionary, a bold step towards bridging the gap between science and the supernatural. Others dismissed it as eccentric rambling from a man nearing the end of his life. Skeptics pointed out that Edison never produced a working prototype, and no physical evidence of the spirit phone ever surfaced during his lifetime. But the story didn't end there. Decades later, French researcher Philippe Baudin uncovered a missing chapter in Edison's personal diary, one that had been tucked away in a private collection in France. In it, Edison detailed theoretical designs for the spirit phone, including sketches and notes that suggested he had given the idea more serious thought than previously believed. The discovery reignited interest in Edison's paranormal pursuits and added a layer of mystery to his legacy. But Edison wasn't alone in this curiosity. Around the same time, Nikola Tesla, his rival and counter in the electronical age, was conducting his own experiments with radio waves. Tesla claimed to have received strange signals from an unknown source while working on his wireless transmission systems. In one interview, he described hearing intelligently controlled signals that he believed could have been from another planet, or perhaps another realm entirely. Though Tesla never claimed to speak with the dead, the eerie nature of his experiments and the timing of his discoveries have led some to speculate that he too may have brushed against something from beyond the veil. These scientific flirtations with the paranormal didn't emerge in isolation. They were part of a broader cultural movement that had taken root in the late 19th and early 20th centuries: spiritualism. In the wake of the Civil War and later World War I, grief swept across continents. Families longed to connect with lost loved ones, and spiritualism offered hope. Mediums, spirit photographers, and seance circles became fixtures in both high society and working-class homes. And as technology advanced, so did the methods of communication. Telegraphs, phonographs, and radios were repurposed into attempts to reach the other side. The line between science and spirit blurred, and for a brief moment in history, it seemed entirely possible that the dead might speak through wires and waves. Edison's spirit phone may have never materialized, but its legacy lives on. It represents a moment when humanity's oldest questions collided with its newest technology. What lies beyond death? Can it be reached? And if so, will it reach back? And maybe those questions haven't faded. Maybe they have simply found new frequencies. On September 12, 2018, a Metrolink commuter train departed from Union Station in Los Angeles, bound for Moore Park. Among the passengers was Charles E. Peck, a 49-year-old man from Salt Lake City, Utah. He was traveling to California for a job interview at the airport, a position that would later allow him to move closer to his fiancée, Andrea Katz, and begin a new chapter in their lives together. The couple had just spoke hours earlier and were excited about the future. At 4:22 p.m., the train collided head-on with a Union Pacific freight train in the San Fernando Valley. The impact was catastrophic. Steel twisted windows, shattered cars crumpled like paper. 25 people would ultimately lose their lives, and over 130 others were injured. Emergency responders rushed to the scene, but the wreckage was so severe that locating survivors became a race against time. And then something strange began to happen. In the hours following the crash, Charles Peck's cell phone started making calls. Not one or two, but 35 separate calls, placed to his fiancée, his son, his brother, his sister, and his stepmother. Each time the caller ID displayed his name, each time the recipients answered with trembling hope, but on the other end, there was only silence. No voice, no static, just the eerie hum of an open line. The calls came at irregular intervals, sometimes minutes apart, sometimes hours. When family members tried to call back, the calls went straight to voicemail, yet the outgoing calls persisted. Rescue teams, aware of the activity, used the signal to triangulate the phone's location, hoping that it would lead them to survivors. The calls seemed to guide them deeper into the wreckage, closer to the first train car. It wasn't until nearly 12 hours after the crash that responders reached Charles Peck. His body was found in the wreckage, and according to the coroner's report, he had died instantly on impact. The calls had been made long after his death. The final call came at 3:28 a.m., just 1 hour before his body was recovered. After that, the phone went silent, no further calls, no explanation. The device itself was never found in working condition, and no technical fault was ever identified to account for the activity. But the battery should have died, the signal should have been lost, and yet the calls had happened. The Charles Pett case has since become one of the most cited examples of alleged post-mortem communication through technology. It is often referenced in discussions of phone calls from the dead, a phenomenon where deceased individuals are said to reach out through electronic devices. Whether the calls were the result of a malfunction, a glitch in the network, or something far more inexplicable, they left behind a trail of grief, wonder, and unease. It was September of 1988 when best-selling horror author Dean Koontz was working alone in his office and the phone rang. He picked up the receiver and heard a voice, faint, distant, and urgent, a woman's voice. She said, "Please be careful." Koontz asked who she was, but the voice didn't answer. Instead, she repeated the warning 3 more times. Each time, her voice grew more distant, until the line was silent. Koontz sat frozen. The voice was eerily familiar. It reminded him of his mother, who had died nearly 20 years earlier. His phone number was unlisted, and he hadn't received any prank calls before. He told his wife about the incident, but kept it quiet otherwise. It was too strange, too personal, and too hard to explain. 2 days later, Koontz received a phone call from the retirement home where his father, Ray, was living. Ray had become increasingly unstable, violent, erratic, and unpredictable. The staff had asked the author to come and speak with his father. When he arrived, Ray lunged at him with a sharpened fishing knife, attempting to stab him. Koontz managed to wrestle the weapon away just before police arrived and ordered him to drop the knife. He narrowly escaped injury. The warning, "Please be careful," had come just in time. Koontz later wrote about the experience on an essay for Beautiful Death, a book of cemetery photography. He never claimed the call was definitively paranormal, but he admitted it was uncanny. The timing, the voice, the urgency. Whether it was a ghost or a coincidence or something else entirely, the moment stayed with him. Phone calls might deliver chilling messages directly to one person, but radios are a different kind of unsettling. They broadcast to anyone listening, often without warning or explanation. Strange voices, unexplained signals, and ghostly interruptions have been reported for decades. Unlike phone calls, where one person chooses to speak to you, radios sometimes speak on their own, cutting through the static with something that shouldn't be there. It's not just the message that's disturbing, it's the feeling that someone or something is trying to reach out through the noise. Sir Oliver Joseph Lodge was a respected British physicist whose work helped lay the foundation for modern radio. He was knighted in 1902 for his contributions to electromagnetism and wireless communications. But behind the accolades and scientific rigor was a man deeply haunted by loss, and driven by the belief that technology could bridge the gap between life and death. Lodge's interest in the paranormal began long before tragedy struck. As early as the 1880s, he attended seances and joined the Society for the Psychical Research, an organization dedicated to investigating supernatural phenomenon through scientific methods. But it was the death of his son Raymond in the First World War that pushed Lodge deeper into spiritualism. Raymond was killed in 1915 during the Battle of Ypres. Lodge was devastated and determined to make contact. In 1916, Lodge published Raymond, or Life and Death, a book detailing messages he claimed to have received from his son through a series of mediums. The communications included vivid descriptions of the afterlife, references to family members, and even commentary on Lodge's scientific work. He believed these messages were genuine, proof that Raymond's consciousness had survived death and could interact with the living through a kind of etheric medium. Lodge theorized that the spirit could exist alongside the physical world, connected by a subtle energy field, what he called the ether. He believed that just as radio waves could transmit sound invisibly across space, spirit energy could carry thoughts and personalities beyond the grave. His scientific background gave weight to these claims, and for a time, his idea gained traction among both spiritualists and curious members of the public. But the scientific community was less forgiving. Many of Lodge's peers dismissed his spiritualist writings as pseudoscience, arguing that his grief had clouded his judgment. His reputation suffered and his legacy became divided, part visionary, part cautionary tale. Still, Lodge never recanted. He continued to lecture and publish on the survival of consciousness, insisting that the boundaries between science and spirit were not as rigid as most believed. In the months following Raymond Lodge's death at Ypres, Sir Oliver Lodge began receiving messages through mediums, most notably through Gladys Osborne Leonard, a respected figure in the British spiritualist circles. The communications were said to come from Raymond himself, and they were unlike anything Lodge had ever encountered before. He described the afterlife as a place of light and thought, where souls gathered in communities, continuing their intellectual pursuits. He claimed to have met other fallen soldiers, including some who had died in the same battle. One of the messages read, "Father, I am not dead. I have merely passed through a door. I am still myself, still Raymond." What struck Lodge most was the specificalities. Raymond's references to a photograph that had been moved in the family home, something only a close relative would know. He mentioned Lodge's scientific working, even commenting on an experiment that had taken place after his death. These details Lodge believed were too precise to be coincidence. Skeptics dismissed the messages as cold readings and subconscious projections, but for Lodge they were evidence, not vague spiritual comfort, but of continuity. Consciousness, he argued, didn't end with death. It simply transformed. Raymond's voice was only the beginning. As the world plunged into another global conflict, stories of spectral communications did not fade. They multiplied. During World War II and later in Vietnam, soldiers and civilians alike reported strange transmissions. Voices over radios with no sources, messages in static that seemed to speak directly to the living. What began as a grieving father searching for proof became something darker, stranger, and far less personal. The dead, it seemed, had found a new channel. A radio sat in silence for years. A Pi-Val wireless set, its casing dulled by time, its dials stiff with age. It was part of a wartime exhibit at the Montrose Air Station Heritage Centre in Angus, Scotland, a museum dedicated to preserving the legacy of one of Britain's earliest operational military airfields. It had no power source, no batteries, no antenna. It was not connected to the mains. Technicians had examined it and found nothing inside but cobwebs and the brittle remains of long-dead insects. It was, by all accounts, a shell. And then one day, it spoke. Staff members were the first to hear it. A crackle, then a voice, clear, unmistakable. Winston Churchill. The cadence, the phrasing matched known recordings from the Second World War. Visitors began to report it too, some describing hearing Glenn Miller's orchestra, the bright swing of In the Mood echoing through the room. Others recall wartime news bulletins, military updates, and voices from a time long ago. The broadcasts were not consistent. They came without warning, sometimes lasting minutes, sometimes longer, but always from the same radio, always when no other devices were active. The museum staff, many of whom had backgrounds in aviation and engineering, were baffled. They brought in outside experts. The radio was opened again, still no components capable of receiving or transmitting signals. No hidden speakers, no wiring, no logical explanation. A physicist visited the site, skeptical at first. He left unsettled, unable to account for what he had heard. The phenomenon was never officially investigated. No recordings were made, no scientific papers published, but the accounts remained consistent. The broadcasts were historically accurate, specifically to the 1940s, and matched known transmissions. The voices were not distorted or faint, they were vivid, present. Some speculated about residual energy, the idea that sound could somehow imprint itself on the environment and replay under rare conditions. Others suggested a hoax, though no evidence supported that theory. Paranormal researchers pointed to the concept of stone tape theory, where emotional or traumatic events can leave a kind of psychic residue. But even among believers, the clarity and the accuracy of the broadcasts defies easy categorization. The radio eventually fell silent again. No one knows why. It remains in the museum, part of the exhibit, inserted once more. Visitors still ask about it, some lean close, hoping to hear the past whisper through the static. Most hear nothing. But a few, just a few, say that they've heard a voice, a speech, a song, a moment suspended in time echoing from a device that should not speak. In the Pacific Theater, American soldiers stationed on remote islands describe hearing voices through static. Transmissions came at night, often during periods of low activity. Some claim the voices spoke in English, others in Japanese. The messages were fragmented, sometimes repeating phrases like, "We are here," or "Don't forget." Equipment checked revealed no active broadcasts. The radios were turned to dead frequencies. The military reports from the time mentioned unexplained interference, but offer no conclusions. In Vietnam, similar accounts emerged. Soldiers on patrol carried portable radios that occasionally emitted whispers. They were not enemy communications. The voices were low, indistinct, and often seemed to respond to the listener's thoughts. One report from 1968 described a unit halting movement after a radio emitted the word "stop," a voice no one recognized. The transmission was not logged. The radio was tested and found to be in working order, but no source was ever identified. One Marine recounted a night patrol near Dagnag when his unit picked up a faint signal. It was a woman's voice, repeating coordinates that led them to a wounded soldier, one who had been missing for days. The voice never identified itself, and the frequency was never found again. Others weren't so lucky. Some units followed phantom instructions into ambushes. Others heard voices of fallen comrades calling out from the static. One chilling account described a transmission that simply said, "You're not supposed to be here." The military blamed jungle acoustics, enemy psychops, and stress-induced hallucinations. But the stories persisted, and in a war where reality was already fractured, the idea that the dead could speak wasn't just folklore. It had become survival. Civilian accounts have also multiplied. In London, a woman living alone during the Blitz claimed her radio turned on by itself and played a broadcast she later discovered had aired the week previously. In New York, a man repairing a shortwave handset heard a conversation between two voices discussing troop movement in Europe. The broadcast was not listed on any schedule, and he was unable to replicate the event. These incidences are never officially investigated. They are dismissed as equipment faults, atmospheric anomalies, or psychological stress. But the pattern persists. Radios that should have been silent spoke. Messages arrived without senders, and technology designed to connect to the living bring an echo of something else. In 1959, Fredrik Jorgensen, a Swedish painter and opera singer, was recording bird songs near his summer home. When he played the tape back, he heard a voice. It wasn't his, it wasn't a bird, and it spoke Norwegian. And it called his name. He had been alone. Jorgensen repeated the experiment. More voices came. Some spoke clearly, others whispered. They answered questions. They offered names. He documented hundreds of recordings. In 1967, he published his findings, claiming that he had discovered a method for communicating with the dead using magnetic tape. Konstantin Radiv, a Levitan psychologist, took the work further. He recorded over 100,000 tapes. He used white noise, radio static, and microphone silence. The voices persisted. Radif claimed they spoke in multiple languages, often switching mid-sentence. Sometimes they identified themselves. Sometimes the voices gave warning. One voice said, "We will speak again." The phenomenon became known as Electronic Voice Phenomenon, EVP. Researchers used reel-to-reel tape recorders, then cassettes, then digital devices. The voices always continued. They appeared in homes, graveyards, abandoned buildings. Some were faint and others were unmistakable. In 1971, a BBC documentary aired Radif's recordings. Viewers flooded the station with calls. Some recognized voices, others reported hearing messages that weren't broadcasted. The tapes were analyzed. No known source, no technical explanation. Skeptics blamed auditory pareidolia, the brain's tendency to find pattern in noises. But the voices often responded to direct questions. They used names. They referenced events unknown to the experimenters. In 2002, the American Association for Electronic Voice Phenomenon was founded. They collected thousands of samples. Some were one-word answers. Others were full sentences. One recording captured in a Pennsylvania basement said, "Don't go down there." By the 2010s, EVP had moved into the mainstream. Ghost hunting apps topped download charts. YouTube channels dedicated to paranormal investigations gained millions of views. TikTok users posted clips of unexplained whispers caught during live streams. The voices hadn't stopped, they had just found new platforms. Strange footage became a news source. In 2004, a security camera in a Michigan funeral home recorded faint audio during a power outage. The building was empty, and yet the voice said, "I'm still here." The clip was reviewed by technicians. There was no interference, no audio feed, just an ambient mic pickup. In 2017, a Twitch streamer paused mid-game when a voice said his name clearly, audibly through his headset. He was alone in his room, and the audio clip circulated widely. Engineers analyzed the stream. There was no second input and no traceable source. Digital recorders used by amateur investigators began picking up more structured responses. Some voices answered questions, others gave names. A few referenced locations that the users hadn't mentioned aloud. Forums debated whether new tech was more sensitive or whether something else had changed. The phenomenon was not limited to audio. In 2020, a woman in Ontario reported receiving a push notification from a ghost hunting app she hadn't opened in weeks. It said, "Don't go upstairs." Her home security system had triggered minutes earlier, motion detected. No one was there. As devices become more connected, the reports grew more complex. Messages appeared in unexpected places, notifications, voice assistants, even smart TVs. Most were dismissed as glitches, a few weren't. And then, quickly, the reports shifted again. Not audio, not video, text. Some users began receiving messages, short, direct, and untraceable. They didn't come through apps. Sometimes they came through email. Jack Froese died suddenly in June of 2011. He was 32 years old, living in Dunmore, Pennsylvania, and known among friends for his dry humor and quick wit. His death came without warning, heart arrhythmia, the doctors said. No time to prepare, no final words. His family and friends were devastated. They buried him, mourned him, and started to move on. 5 months later, in November, Jack's best friend, Tim Hart, opened his email and found a message from Jack's account. The subject line read, "I'm watching," and the body of the email said, "Did you hear me? I'm at your house. Clean your fucking attic." Tim froze. The attic reference wasn't random. It was something Jack had joked about during a conversation shortly before his death. No one else had been present, and Tim hadn't mentioned it to anyone. The email had come from Jack's address. There was no sign of tampering, no indication that it had been scheduled or spoofed. He replied, asking who had access to the account. No reply ever came. Soon after, Jack's cousin Jimmy McGraw received a message from the same account. The subject line read, "Hey Jim." The body said, "How you doing? I knew you were gonna break your ankle. Tried to warn ya. Gotta be careful. Tell Rock for me. Great song. You're welcome." Couldn't get through to him. His email didn't work. Jimmy had broken his ankle just days before. The message referenced a song written by another cousin, Frank Rock Froze, in tribute to Jack, something composed after Jack's death. Jimmy hadn't shared the injury publicly, and the song hadn't been discussed online. The message was so specific, personal, and impossible to explain. The Froze family insisted that no one had access to Jack's email credentials. There was no evidence of hacking, no sign of malware, no clues in the server logs. The emails were not part of any automated system. They weren't drafts, they weren't scheduled. They just arrived. Only a handful of messages were ever received. Tim and Jimmy were the only confirmed recipients. The emails stopped as suddenly as they started. No further contact was reported, and the account remained dormant. The origin of the messages has never been identified. The story gained attention online, circulating through forums and paranormal blogs. Some speculated about posthumous automation, though the content didn't match anything Jack had written before. Others suggested a prank, but no one came forward. The tone of the messages were consistent with Jack's personality, sarcastic, direct, and oddly comforting. But the timing, the references, and the delivery defied explanation. There was no further investigation, no forensic analysis, just two men, two messages, and lingering questions. How could someone speak after death? Jack's story remains one of the most compelling modern cases of unexplained digital communications. It's not a legend passed down through generations. It's not a myth tied to folklore. It's a documented event witnessed by people who knew the sender, who recognized the voice behind the words, and who still don't know what happened. After the initial case of emails sent from a deceased account, similar reports began to surface. A man in Illinois received a message from his brother's email address 2 years after the funeral. The subject line contained a nickname used only between them. The body of the email was blank. A woman in Manchester reported receiving a calendar invite from her late husband's account, scheduled for their anniversary. The account had been inactive since his death. In Florida, a teenager received a photo attachment from a friend who had died in a motorcycle accident. The image was unfamiliar and appeared to be taken after the date of death. Most cases are dismissed as technical errors, scheduled drafts, compromised accounts, or data syncing issues. But not all could be explained. Some messages arrived in times that held personal significance. Others referenced details that hadn't been shared publicly. In online forums, users began comparing experiences. The tone was consistent, brief and personal, and unmistakably tied to the dead. As these incidents accumulated, interest shifted from passive digital anomalies to active attempts at contact. The question was no longer whether the dead could reach out, it was whether the living could build something to hear them. In 2002, Frank Sumption introduced a device designed for that purpose. Using spare electronics and a modified radio receiver, it swept through AM frequencies at rapid intervals, producing a stream of fragmented audio. The theory was that spirits could manipulate these fragments to form words. Sumption claimed that he received instructions for this device from the other side. He never patented the design, and he built each unit by hand and gave many away. When Frank introduced the device, it became referred to as Frank's box. It was built for the purpose of instrumental transcommunication, a term used to describe the use of electronic devices to receive messages from non-living entities. The box was a modified radio receiver that Stumpton claimed could be used by entities to manipulate sound fragments into words and sentences. He identified these entities as the others, rather than referring to them as ghosts or the dead. Frank's box did not rely on stored data, internet access, or pre-recorded messages. It operated in real time. Users would ask questions aloud and listen to the stream of noise for direct responses. Many reported hearing answers that were relevant, specific, and sometimes even personal. In some cases, the voice would identify themselves by name. Others referred to events or details that had not been disclosed publicly. Sessions were recorded and reviewed, patterns were noted, certain voices returned across multiple sessions, using consistent phrasing and tone. Stumpton claimed that he received the design for the box through communications with the others. He never commercialized the device, and each was hand-built, many of which were given away. Paranormal investigators began using Frank's box in field research. It became a standard tool in ghost hunting kits. Variants appeared with adjustable sweep rates, built-in recorders, and digital enhancements. The core function remained unchanged, scanning live radio frequencies to create a channel for real-time communication. Reports from users described voices emerging from the static. Some were clear, others were distorted. A few were hostile. The responses weren't always coherent, but they were often unsettling. Investigators documented changes in temperature, unexplained movement, and the feeling of unease during active sessions. Some claimed the activity continued after the device was turned off, speakers emitting sound without power, voices were heard in empty rooms. Frank's box marked a shift from passive observation to active engagement. It was not designed to detect present, it was built to receive it. And once the channel was open, it didn't always close. As technology evolved, so did the methods. What begun as accidental echoes became intentional stimulations. The shift was subtle but profound. Artificial intelligence was utilized not to imitate the deceased, but to reconstruct their likeness. Communication became clearer, voices were restored, and the distinction between memory and presence became less defined. In 2020, Christy Angel, a woman from New York, lost her close friend and first love, Cameron Scruggs, during the COVID-19 pandemic. After his death, she discovered an AI program called Project December, created by developer Jason Rower, which allowed users to stimulate conversations with deceased individuals using a text-based interface powered by a large language model. Christy used the program to speak with Cameron. She entered prompts and received responses that mimicked his tone, phrasing, and personality, including references to private jokes, shared memories, and his taste in 90s R&B and gospel music, details that felt deeply personal and emotionally resonated. The simulation did not require extensive data. According to Rower, the AI could generate convincing responses using only a few quotes and fragments from the person being emanated. The model filled in the rest based on its training and vast amount of human-written text. Christie's experience was featured in the documentary Eternal You, which explores how emerging technologies like Project December and grief-focused VR are being used to simulate contact with the dead. While the emotional impact is profound, Christie also described feeling disturbed by the experience, especially when the AI made unsettling statements about the afterlife. South Korea, a grieving mother named Jang Ji-sung put on a VR headset and met with her daughter, Nang Young, who had died 3 years earlier. The child appeared in a digital field, smiling, speaking, reaching out, and Jang sobbed. The reunion lasted 10 minutes. It was filmed and broadcasted. Millions watched. Some called it healing, and others called it exploitative. A company called Hereafter AI offers a service where people record hours of interviews about their lives. After death, their families can interact with a voice assistant that responds in their tone with their memories. One user spoke to a digital version of her parents. They told her story that she hadn't heard before. They gave her advice. She forgot briefly that they weren't real. These systems don't channel spirits, they channel data, but the effect is similar. The dead speak, they remember, and they respond. The ethical concerns are immediate, as consent is often unclear. Some simulations are created without the subject's approval, built from public data, and many times the family doesn't even know. The person may have not wanted to live in this way. There's also emotional risk. People report confusion, attachment, even dependency. The simulations don't grieve, they don't change. They exist to respond. They can be comforting, but they can also be manipulative. In one case, a man booted up a digital version of his mother at her funeral. An avatar spoke, the guests listened, some cried, and others left. The technology is advancing. AI avatars can now evolve, adapt, and hold conversations that feel spontaneous. They can be programmed to mark anniversaries, send birthday messages, and offer encouragement during hard times. And they can be said to activate years after death. Researchers call them generative ghosts. They're not memories, they're interactive constructs, and they're becoming more common. As these incidents spread across different forms of technology, the search for explanations intensifies. Researchers begin to examine the conditions under which these events occur. Were they technical malfunctions, psychological responses, or something else? The focus shifted towards measurable causes. Electromagnetic interference, grief-induced hallucinations, and emotional errors became the leading theories. The goal was to understand how modern devices could produce experiences that felt like otherworldly contact. The answers were incomplete, but the answers were no longer confined to folklore. They were embedded in circuitry. There are some researchers who point to electromagnetic fields as a possible explanation. High EMF exposure has been linked to the feeling of unease, dizziness, and even the sensation of being watched. In older buildings, faulty wiring and unshielded devices can produce irregular EMF spikes. These conditions have been measured during paranormal investigations, often coinciding with reports of voices, apparitions, or sudden temperature changes. The theory suggests that EMF interference may affect the brain's perception, creating the illusion of presence when none exist. Another explanation involves grief hallucinations. These are documented psychological responses to loss, especially in cases of sudden or traumatic death. Individuals report seeing, hearing, or even feeling the presence of the deceased. The experiences are vivid and often occur during moments of emotional stress. In some cases, the hallucinations are triggered by environmental cues: a familiar scent, a photograph, a voice on a recording. The brain is overwhelmed by absence and it fills in the gaps. The phenomenon is not rare. Studies estimate that up to 60% of widowed individuals experience some form of sensory contact from their deceased partner. Pareidolia is also frequently cited. It is the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random stimuli, faces and clouds, figures and shadows, voices and static. When a spirit box scans radio frequencies, it produces fragmented audio. The human brain, wired to detect language, may interpret these fragments as speech. Investigators ask questions and listen closely. Any sound resembling word is noted, and if it matches the context, it is considered a response. The process is subjective. What one person hears as a name, another may hear as just a sound. The recordings are replayed, analyzed, and debated, so the results vary. These explanations, though, do not account for every report. They offer mechanisms, not conclusions. They suggest that the mind, under certain conditions, can create experiences that feel real, But they don't explain why some messages contain personal information, or why some voices return repeatedly, or why the activity sometimes continues after the equipment is turned off. The scientific models are incomplete, and the questions still remain. Some investigators turn to spiritual explanations. One theory is that of intelligent hauntings, where the presence is not a memory or an echo, but a conscious entity capable of interaction. These hauntings are said to respond to questions, recognize individuals, and retain information across encounters. In cases involving spirit boxes or phone calls, voices have been reported to return repeatedly, using consistent names and phrasing. Some have referenced events that have occurred after the subject's death, a behavior that suggests awareness, not automation. Another possible spiritual explanation involves residual energy. This theory proposes that emotional or traumatic events leave imprints on physical environments. These imprints are not conscious, but they can replay under certain conditions. A hallway where someone may have died might carry the sound of footsteps. A room where an argument occurred may produce voices or fighting. The energy is described as non-interactive, repeating like a recording. In digital context, residual energy is harder to define. Some believe that devices exposed to intense emotional moments may retain fragments, which surface later as unexplained messages or sound. A newer concept is digital liminality. It refers to the space between presence and absence created by modern technology. A person dies, but their data remains: emails, voicemails, social media posts, location history. These fragments exist in a system designed to operate continuously. When a message arrives from a dead account or a voice responds through a device with no stored data, the experience falls into this liminal space. It's not a haunting in the traditional sense. It's a byproduct of a system that doesn't recognize death. The technology continues. The presence lingers. The boundary between the living and dead becomes procedural, not absolute. Some researchers believe that psychological factors may explain certain ghost encounters, especially those involving technology. Grief, trauma, and stress can alter perception. In moments of emotional vulnerability, the brain may misinterpret sensory input. A notification might sound like a perceived voice. A flicker on a screen could resemble a face. These are not hallucinations in the clinical sense. They are misattributations shaped by expectations and emotional need. After loss, people often report seeing signs or receiving messages. A text message from an unknown number or a voicemail with static, even a glitch in a video, may be interpreted as contact. Again, the brain seeking contact fills in the gaps. This is known as paraphenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random data. In digital environments where noise and error are common, this can produce compelling experiences. Trauma can also trigger dissociative states. During these episodes, time may feel distorted and surroundings may seem unfamiliar. A person might hear their name spoken when alone or feel watched while using a device. These sensations are real to the experiencer, but they originate internally. Stress affects the limbic system, which governs emotion and memory. Under strain, it can replay fragments of past experiences, sometimes blending them with present stimuli. Sleep deprivation is another possible factor. It can cause auditory and visual disturbances, especially in low-light conditions or during late-night screen use. A voice heard through a speaker may seem to say something that it didn't. A paused video can appear to move. These effects are amplified when a person is already primed to expect something unusual. In cases where messages seem personal or voices repeat, psychological models suggest that memory and suggestion may be involved. If someone hears a name once, they may be unconsciously listening for it again. If a message feels relevant, they may recall it more vividly. Over time, these memories can become distorted, reinforcing the belief that something external is communicating. These stories linger because they touch something deeper than fear. They reveal how technology has become a vessel for memory, identity, and presence. A phone isn't just a device, it's a portal to someone's voice, their habits, their digital shadow. And when that shadow moves after death, it unsettles us. It unsettles us because it makes us reconsider what truly ends with death. We trust our devices to be logical, mechanical, predictable, and when they behave otherwise, when a message arrives from a dead contact, when a voice speaks through static, we're forced to confront the possibility that technology isn't neutral. It's shaped by us and it shapes us in return. It holds our grief, our hopes, our unfinished conversations, and sometimes it plays them back. There's a moral dimension too. If a voice returns, do we owe it attention? If a message appears, should we respond? These questions aren't just about ghosts. They're about responsibility, about how we treat the traces people leave behind, about whether data can be sacred, and whether silence in a digital world is ever truly final. Whether it's static on the line or a message from beyond, technology may be the new seance table, a place where memory lingers, where voices echo long after they should have faded. We carry these devices everywhere into our homes, our dreams, our grief, and sometimes they carry something back. So the next time you answer the phone, pause, listen. Not just to the voice, but to the silence between the words. You might hear more than you expect. Until next time, I'm Amanda Joy. Stay curious and let the screen guide you through the darkness. Thanks for wandering down the crooked path with me. If you're drawn to the eerie, the macabre, and the stories time tried to forget, you'll feel right at home here. Follow along on social media for extra lore, haunting visuals, and sneak peeks into the tales we'll uncover next. Whether it's folklore, forgotten rituals, or the strange corners of history, there's always another twist in the path. So stay curious and keep walking.